Number 1.
For context, I am a female and was 14 at the time of this event. It was December, and my parents were driving me and my brother down to my aunt's to drop off Christmas presents. When we arrived, my parents decided to stay and chat for a bit, and naturally, I got bored, so I offered to take their dog, Dan, for a walk. He's a golden retriever, so pretty laid-back dog, and not very intimidating at all. They agreed, but warned me to stay on the main street and not to go down any poorly lit roads, since my aunt lives in quite a rough area of England. I mumbled something and walked out the door, thinking that I was able to protect myself. Me and Dan walked for about 5 or so minutes before I got bored and was curious to check out a smaller street on my left. This road seemed slightly eerie, and the houses were a lot more beat up than the ones on the main street. I ignored this and continued to walk to the end of the road. As I turned the corner, I noticed a figure dressed head to toe in black and holding what seemed to be a crowbar. I think he was attempting to break into a car, but I couldn't quite tell, as the only light was a dim flickering orange coming from the street lamps. I stood there and stared at him blankly in awe and shock before coming to my senses and swiftly making my escape. He hadn't noticed me, and I was planning to walk back to my aunt's house to call the police, but I realized that I wanted to be sure that he was actually breaking into the car before causing any commotion. I turned left at the main street and walked down an alley which led back to the same road. There was a car parked up against the pavement, and I used that to my advantage by crouching behind it and peering my head around the side. I squinted, trying to get a better view, but Dan went crazy then, began barking and growling. I hissed at him to stop, but it was too late. The man was already turned in our direction. I couldn't make out his face because he was wearing a hood, but I knew that he must have seen me as he began to slowly walk towards the car with inconsistent steps. My brain told me that I needed to get out of there, so I yanked Dan by the collar and we bolted down the nearest alley. I could hear him closing in, but I kept running, taking random turns and trying to lose him, but it didn't work. At one point, he managed to get right behind me and grab my leg, but I pulled it away, causing him to trip. I took that as my chance and ran left and right down any road I came across. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care as long as it was away from him. He was still behind me, but not as close anymore, so I turned down a road and crouched in a neighbor's bush while holding my breath. The man ran straight past me and down another street. He didn't come back. I was in that bush for a good 20 minutes, sobbing into Dan's fur, before I had the courage to come out. I managed to find my way back, and we called the police, but I don't think the man was found, since I couldn't make out his features. To this day, I still hate to think what would have happened if he had caught me.
Number 2.
Background story. I'm a military brat, so I've lived in quite a few places. In 2007, when I was 11, we had to move to a small city in the middle of the Amazon, close to the Colombian border. The city was very isolated, and we lived in an even more isolated military village. There were 3 villages: the private village, the sergeant's village, and the officer's village. These villages were linked through trails that cut through the heavy woods. One of these trails was crossed by a water stream. The internet was very slow. I remember my downloads having the crazy velocity of 3 KB per second. We had no cell phone service. The TV only received signal from 2 channels. We had almost nothing to do, so the kids were very united. We spent the day riding our bicycles, going through the trails, spending the day in someone's house. It was great. In one of those trails, one day, a man started showing up. He had the features of a native person and always seemed to be taking care of the nature, collecting trash that someone left behind, calling for birds, looking after the trees. We talked to him sometimes, and we named him the Rainforest Man because he knew a lot about the trees and the animals. I remember asking him one day why he was there, and he said that the command of the base hired him to help them explore the area because he knew the area very well. It seemed logical to me, so I brushed it off. One particular day, 2 girlfriends of mine and I were in this other girl's house. Her house was in a different village than ours, and while we were there, a boy showed up. This boy was a couple years older than us, and my friends were very interested in him. It was starting to get dark, and I told them that we should go home, but they wanted to stay and talk to this boy, and I was too scared to go back alone, so I waited for them. When we decided to go home, it was really dark. The trails weren't illuminated, and we could see very little, so in the middle of the dark, we saw a light in our path, more precisely through the water stream. We got scared and decided to hide and see who it was. After a while, we could see that the person holding the flashlight was the native guy. He was furiously looking for something, waving his flashlight around. He probably heard us. The thing is, he was holding a very large knife called a pixera. It's commonly used there to cut big fish. We stayed quiet for a while, but as it was getting even darker, we decided to reveal ourselves. We got into our bikes and went straight to the water stream where he was, that we needed to cross. But before we arrived there, he found us. He was right in front of us with his knife pointed at us. We couldn't cross the water stream riding our bikes, so we dropped it there and ran for our lives. After we passed him, he turned off his flashlight. It was absolutely dark. We could see close to nothing, but we just ran straight ahead. When I got to the other side of the stream, I fell down and hurt my knees. He probably thought I was still running with the other girls, so I decided to stay where I was instead of getting up, making too much noise and revealing my location. He then turned the flashlight again, and I could see he was stealing one of our bikes. He brought it to the water stream and carried the bike on his back, following the water path into the woods. I remember he walked really close to me, and it was one of the scariest moments of my life. After he was considerably far, I got up and ran straight ahead. When I finally got to the village, our parents were already running to me, since the other girls had already told them what happened. I never saw the Rainforest Man again. Turns out they never hired anyone, as the guy had told me. After this, soldiers started to supervise the trails, and no one ever showed up again, at least while I lived there. So, Rainforest Man, I know we probably won't meet again, but just to be sure, let's not.
Number 3.
One of the top 10 scariest experiences in my life occurred abroad. Instead of a class trip where we'd be surrounded by drunken high school kids and clueless chaperones, we decided to go on a family trip instead. The 4 of us, my mom, my dad, my older sister and I, found ourselves in Central Europe of all places. Now in this city, there was a very famous church that we'd been touring for hours. To be entirely honest, I did zone out a couple times just to take in the scenery and people watch. The people watching probably saved my skin, but more on that in a minute. During this guided tour, I could obviously see who was on the tour just by how tightly we were all packed together listening. I could also see the people on the outskirts who weren't technically on the tour, but were listening in anyways. But there was this one guy that seemed anomalous, like he wasn't in any group or tour. I don't know why he stuck out to me. He could have been just some solo worshiper going about his business. Maybe it was because he was so tall. Maybe it was because he seemed very Mediterranean and contrasted a lot with the people in the church. But I think it was because he was just standing very, very still and quiet in a room full of chatter and swirling eddies of people. It was nothing really suspect, just odd, so I passed it by. The church was absolutely massive, and it took us multiple hours to get around the whole thing. I noticed the man seemed to pop up around us a lot. Over at the pipe organ? So was he. Decide to go into an alcove? Bam! There he was. But again, the whole crowd was following the same path, and he wasn't doing anything wrong. I just ignored it. Obviously, after a couple hours in that stuffy place, my sister and I were tired and sweaty. We wanted to go to the hotel and shower up before dinner, but our parents wanted to stay a little longer. We decided to split up. Stupid, I know. But we felt safe as we had the map and our hotel was quite close. We parted ways around 3 p.m. Unfortunately, we were not as skilled in map reading as we supposed. We found ourselves on a bridge over a canal an hour later with no sign of our destination. The sun was beginning to set, and we were really feeling the crunch of time. After another half hour of dicking around and refusing to ask directions, I decided we needed to go back to the church and find our parents. The church is the tallest building in the city, so it can easily be seen from anywhere. We set off towards it in a rush, hoping to beat the sunset. In our hurry, we decided to go to the most direct way possible. Instead of staying on the main road crowded with locals, we decided to bisect a large city block and cut through a narrow alleyway. The alley was pretty well lit, cobblestone, and had many twists and turns as we went through. We walked quite casually until my sister linked her arm through mine, a very odd gesture, and squeezed. Looking dead ahead and barely moving her mouth, I heard her mutter, "Behind us." I instantly faked a hard cough, so my eyes had an excuse to wander. Lo and behold, across the tiny alley and a little behind us was, you guessed it, tall and creepy. Now, originally, I was unconcerned. So there's another person using the alley at the same time as us. Big deal. But the more I thought about it, the more unlike that seemed. He was alone and without a map. Clearly, he knew where he was going. If he recognized us from the church and was following us back, why would he take directions from two kids who obviously didn't know where they were? And isn't it a little kismet that he was in the church and in this exact alleyway at the exact same time as us? It's a little too perfect, and I start to worry. I can see my sister start to scheme our way out of this as I'm keeping an eye out. But again, he could still be anyone just minding his business. So we start walking faster than before, not quite jogging, but a step below power walking. I fake another cough to assess the situation, and my stomach drops like a rock. He's kept pace with us the whole time, and he's not alone anymore. He's walking with two guys, one skinny and olive-colored, while the other is this bald, hulking beast of a dude who looks kind of German. Now, as girls, we're pretty tough. We could have taken down Mr. Skinny and Creepy, and even his pal Mr. Olive, but there's no way in hell we can take this dude, let alone all three at once. Now, my sister has been hatching a plan the whole time. I squeeze her arm, and she looks at me. I gesture with my eyes for her to take a look. As we both slide a peek across the road, we see they're no longer there. Instead, the footsteps continue about 50 feet behind us. They've crossed the alleyway. We begin to approach a bend in the alleyway that would temporarily hide us from view. It also happens to be a crossroads for another alley. In the same tone, my sister says something to the effect of, "When we hit that corner, book your ass to the main road." I nod, just enough for her to see. We round the corner and take off like bats out of hell. It's a good 100-yard sprint, and we take it at full speed. We finally hit the main road, panting like dogs. I have my hands on my knees because I was pretty sure I was going to puke from the fear, and my sister was looking pretty pale too. I bet the locals got a real kick though, staring at us crazy Americans, like, "Are you high?" Anyway, I did look back into the alleyway, but no one was there. I am so glad we were able to lose them, because God knows what they would have done if they caught us.